And bad morning, everybody. Today's October 22nd, 2018. Welcome to episode 66 of Bad Morning News, where we will cover all the negative news that's not fit for the mainstream media and some other things. But it is true that most of the news that will be covered is negative, but I believe that is something that's necessary, even though it can be distressing. I still think it is necessary to keep up even on negative news stories. Just a couple housekeeping notes. Thanks to our sponsor, Brave Browser. If you are tired of the mainstream corporations out there selling your data to the highest bidder, try out Brave Browser. There's a link in the if you download the browser from there, it benefits the show. So thanks to anyone considering doing that. And just another note that Bad Morning News is looking for new hosts. So if you're interested in potentially this morning slot or some potentially down the line an afternoon show with Bad Morning News, give us a shout out in the Discord or in the comments of the video. And with that, I'm Cryptic Cynic here with you this morning. And with that, we'll go ahead and get right into the first story. This one is from local news king5.com, written by Travis Pittman. Strong earthquakes strike off Canada's Vancouver Island. 4 quakes struck in less than an hour off the west coast of Canada's Vancouver Island Sunday night. A series of strong earthquakes struck off the coast of Canada's Vancouver Island Sunday night, ranging in strength between magnitude 4.9 and 6.8. The first, a magnitude 6.6, struck at 9:39 p.m. Sunday, 135 miles southwest of Port Hardy, British Columbia. And that was followed by the most powerful quake in the string, a magnitude 6.8 at 10:16 p.m. That one was located about 13 miles closer to the island. 6 minutes later, a magnitude 6.5 struck in the same general area as the first two. A fourth quake, registered at magnitude 4.9, struck at 10:36 in the same vicinity. There were no immediate reports of damage or tsunami warnings. Earthquakes that struck within an hour just off of Canada's Vancouver Island, which is on the west coast of Canada. Um, they scientists supposedly say that the west coast is overdue for some kind of major calamitous earthquake, and they've been saying that for decades at this point. I know Seattle, there's always news that pops up here and there about Seattle potentially being overdue for really devastating. Even the same is said about places like San Francisco that have had some bigger earthquakes in the past few decades. So, it's always kind of a guessing game. Scientists will try to predict them, but overall, it's still difficult to know with any certainty if an earthquake is going to strike in a particular place. So it's something I'm concerned about. Potentially, maybe that's a reason why I should leave the West Coast. I've been wanting to for many reasons, but I guess we'll see. I mean, it is kind of odd when you think about how densely populated the West Coast is, and how apparently there's such a looming danger that could happen to a lot of these West Coast cities. So I guess people either aren't afraid of that risk of earthquake, or I don't know exactly, but you'd think more people would be wary. But I guess it's hard to be afraid if it's something you don't know whether or not it will happen. So that kind of makes earthquakes a little different from other natural disasters, I guess. But in any event, you know, I didn't notice anything. I'm not sure. Um, well, it's the article says they were strong earthquakes, but I guess it wasn't quite strong enough to be felt far away. But depending on how deep within the earthquake occurs, it can be felt. Sometimes it'll be felt farther away, sometimes not so much. I know there was an earthquake in up in the New York City area some years ago, maybe around 2010. That was a shock at the time because that's not known as a really prominent earthquake area, but they had an earthquake and I remember it was felt pretty far away from the actual epicenter of the earthquake because of the ground on the East Coast being harder apparently than the ground on the West Coast, which would lend itself to an earthquake being felt farther away than it would be on the West Coast. So just some interesting thoughts about that, but I guess we will have to see if the big one never comes. And our next article comes from a Free Thought Project. Entitled, "Here's Why the Mega Millions on America's Poor." The Mega Millions jackpot is close to 1 billion, which has mostly poor and middle class citizens flocking to gas stations attempt to strike it rich. With the Mega Millions jackpot now nearly 1 billion, people, mostly those in lower and middle classes, are coming out in droves and buying lottery tickets with hopes of striking it rich. After all, 1 billion can even afford healthcare in America. Naturally, we wish the lucky winner all the non-diluted best. There is, however, a small problem here when one steps back from the Sino forest trees, as Data Trek researchers Nicholas Colas previously explained. Lotteries essentially target and encourage lower income individuals, a cycle that directly prevents them from improving their financial status and leverages their desire to escape poverty. Yes, that's a bit harsh, and yes, people have the right to make their own decisions, even bad ones. Also, many people tend to significantly overestimate the odds of winning because we tend to assess the likelihood of an event occurring based on how frequently we hear about it happening. The technical name for this is the availability heuristic, which means the more we hear about big winners in the press, the less uncommon a big payday begins to seem. Call it that or call it what one wishes, the end result is that the lottery is nothing but society's perfectly efficient way of, to use a term from the vernacular, keeping the poor man down while dangling hopes and dreams of escaping into the world of the loathsome and oh so very detested 1%ers. Alas, the probability of the latter happening to you is virtually non existent. Summary: American adults spend an average of $251 on lottery tickets last year, with a return of 53 cents on the dollar. This means the average person threw away $118 on unsuccessful lotto tickets. Not a great investment. So why are we spending so much? Well, lotteries are a fun, cheap opportunity to daydream about the possibility of becoming an overnight millionaire, but on the flip side, people tend to overestimate the odds of winning. Lower income demographics spend a much greater portion of their annual earnings on lottery tickets than do wealthier ones. Since lotteries are state run, that effectively means that the less affluent pay more in taxes, albeit by choice, than broadly appreciated, and even winning the lottery doesn't guarantee financial success. More than 5% of lottery winners declare bankruptcy within 5 years of taking home the jackpot. Despite their drawbacks, lotteries are no doubt here for the long haul. In states that have lotteries, an average of 11% of their total revenues come from lottery ticket sales, and the number is even as high as 36% in two states, West Virginia and Michigan. Note from Nick: daydreams may be the best example of a product in an inflationary spiral. The price of a Powerball lottery ticket went from $1 to $2 on January 1st. That news got me thinking about the price elasticity of fantasies. After all, the state lottery commissions involved in this venture must believe a 100% price bump will not deter enough customers to lower their overall intake. That's a big gamble, pun intended, to take on what is an increasingly important revenue input for many state budgets. Beth takes up the story from here. Consider the following credit card advertisement style sequence of statistics. Lottery ticket sales in the US in 2010, 59 billion, average spending per person $191, average spending per adult $251, chance at hitting the jackpot apparently priceless. I have never bought a lottery ticket and honestly don't even know how. As far as I'm aware, I don't know anyone who spends north of $200 a year playing the lotto. The only lottery my friends play is the NYC Marathon Lottery, where they're gambling for maybe a 1 in 13 chance to fork over $255 for the privilege of slugging out 26 miles through the city's streets, not quite hitting the jackpot in most people's minds. But someone somewhere is buying all those tickets. In Massachusetts, where the lottery is more popular than in any other state, people spend an average of $634 a year on Mega Millions, Powerball, and the like. Delaware comes in at $904 spent per person, while Rhode Island $469 and West Virginia $388 and New York $357 round out the top 5. North Dakota brings up the rear with per capita lottery spending of $34. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly who is investing so much money in a product that provides poor returns, but numerous studies show that lower income people spend a much greater proportion of their earnings on lotteries than do wealthier people. One figure suggests that households making less than $13,000 a year spend a full 9% of their income on lotteries. This, of course, makes no sense. Poor people should be the least willing to waste their hard earned cash on games with such terrible odds of winning. Why bother? Well, one answer is obvious enough and applies to just about everyone who plays. For a buck, we have a cheap opportunity to daydream what could happen if we suddenly won millions of dollars, but lotteries return 53 cents to the dollar. So why are poor people irrationally buying tickets when the probability of winning is so slim? One study by a team of Carnegie Mellon University behavioral economists suggests it isn't being poor, but rather feeling poor that compels people to purchase lotto tickets. By influencing participants' perceptions of their relative wealth, the researchers found that people who felt poor bought almost 2 times as many lottery tickets as those who were made to feel more affluent. Here's how they did it. Participants were asked to complete a survey that included an item on annual income. One group was asked to provide its income on a scale that began at less than 100,000 and went up from there in increments of $100,000. It was designed so that most respondents would be in the lowest category and therefore feel poor. The other group, made to feel subjectively wealthier, was asked to report on an income scale that began with less than $10,000 and increased in $10,000 increments. Therefore, most participants were in a middle or upper tier. All participants were paid $5 for participating in the survey and given the chance to buy up to 5 $1 scratch-off lottery tickets. The group who felt wealthier bought .67 tickets on average, compared with 1.27 tickets for the group who felt poor. And that's a good place to end with this article. There's a little bit more there. But basically, it's just talking about how people really don't seem to understand how bad the chances are for them to win these lottery grand prizes and whatnot. And overall, they're probably wasting more money that they don't need to waste because their chances are so slim. And personally, I've never really been into gambling. I think I never have confidence in winning anything, so I just automatically discount the idea that I could be the one in however many million people to win something like that. But apparently, a lot of people do. I mean, I've known plenty of people who go out and buy lottery tickets regularly. Even my mom used to do that, and she certainly wasn't, too well off financially. But, I guess there is something in it that psychologically um, people feel like a rush in a way when they participate in some of these lotteries. So I guess I can see that, just the psychological effect. But overall, it's not a good investment, apparently. So let me check out some comments here. Bad morning, Danielle. Good to see you. Danielle says 4 or 5 months when I was a kid. I lived in a house on the beach at Puget Sound. Times have changed from what I hear. Never felt anything like that there in the 60s. But Virginia had one in 2011. They also figure someone will win and it could be them, they hope. And Danielle says, I have never bought a ticket. Am I hopeless? LOL. Well, if you're hopeless, I am too because I've never bought one either. I don't. I guess I'm just not like superstitious. It seems like a lot of people who do buy lottery tickets are kind of have a superstition and have a pattern that they use when choosing what numbers they choose and whatnot. And I just don't really have any direction with that. I don't really have any way to that I would go about choosing numbers that I feel were lucky or whatnot. But yeah, in any event, yeah. Yeah, the Puget Sound area is pretty different now. It's basically become a mini San Francisco, it seems like, just with tons of people moving to the Puget Sound area from Northern California because of it being cheaper, or at least it was a few years ago. But of course, prices are going way up now. But there's already wildfire issues sometimes in the Washington area. So I mean, it would, and there've also been some landslides or mudslides a few years ago. So other than that, I don't know how many other natural disasters are a threat here, but there's always the potential of an earthquake, I suppose. Daniel Hatfield says the odds are always against the user. There are some game styles for Lotto that can be profitable, but they are bad setups for the Lotto itself. I think Boston and Chicago had Lotto rollovers like that. Danielle says, I bet the homes there have changed a lot too. Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of new development. I couldn't say what's changed in terms of the homes. I just have heard a lot of stories about people who were more like blue collar type people with regular average jobs who were able to buy houses in some of these neighborhoods that are now pretty high end and in demand. And of course, they bought them for maybe $50,000, 60,000, 3 or 4 decades ago, and now they're worth millions, being bought by a lot of these people working for Microsoft or Amazon or Google, our friend Google. And in any event, let's move on to the next article. This one was stupid. This is from AINonline.com, written by Matt Thurber. ADS-B vulnerability remains a serious concern. An article in AIN's September issue addressed concerns that have been raised about the security of the ADS-B system, which is headed for widespread deployment around the world. ADS-B is designed to replace radar as the primary method for surveillance of airborne traffic. ADS-B can replace low-resolution radar detection of transponder-equipped aircraft with automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, or ADS-B signals, which broadcast speed, location, and other information to properly equipped ground stations and other aircraft. ADS-B out equipment, mandatory in the US starting in 2020, transmits ADS-B information, while the more sophisticated ADS-B in equipment receives ADS-B information and makes it available to pilots. ADS-B is not secure, according to a white paper published by Eurocom, a teaching and research consortium of 7 European universities and 9 international partners based in Sofia and Antipolis, France. The paper was authored by André Costin and Aurélien Francillon. In this paper, they wrote, "We demonstrate that attacks are both easy and practically feasible for a moderately sophisticated attacker. Attacks range from passive attacks, eavesdropping, to active attacks, message jamming, replaying of injection. What they mean by replaying of injection is creating fake ADS-B targets and injecting them into the ATC system so that controllers and pilots see false ADS-B targets that appear to be real aircraft. This so-called spoofing or injection of fake targets is one of the most urgent concerns of those raising questions about ADS-B security, and Costin and Francillon have demonstrated false injection in a closed and safe test rig. They point out that injecting a false target would require only an amplifier and an antenna to actually emit the radio signals. Addressing system vulnerabilities. What concerns the authors of this white paper most is that, surprisingly, despite years of standardization, development, thorough testing, and ongoing deployment, by design, the ADS-B protocol used in commercial air traffic doesn't specify mechanisms to ensure that protocol messages are authentic, non-replayed, or adhere to other security properties. Given the budget involved and the sensitivity of air traffic, it is surprising that such a system was not designed with security in mind. The white paper outlined specific security ADS-B vulnerabilities: lack of entity authentication to protect against message injection from unauthorized entities, lack of message signatures or authentication codes to protect against tampering of messages or impersonating aircraft, lack of message encryption to protect against eavesdropping, lack of challenge response mechanisms to protect against replay attacks, lack of ephemeral identifiers to protect against privacy tracking attacks. Filling these security holes is achievable according to the white paper, and one way to do so would be to incorporate public key infrastructure, or PKI, as a viable solution for securing ADS-B in the short and long terms. And the first and simplest thing that would greatly enhance the security of ADS-B is to add integrity verification to the ADS-B messages. The white paper authors believe that regulators should require avionics manufacturers to incorporate security, integrity checking, and PKI distribution processes into their ADS-B products. By doing this, they wrote, the message injection is suddenly not possible, or at least not as easy to accomplish. The paper's conclusion asserts that ADS-B security issues have been well documented in previous studies and by the hacker community, but the fundamental architectural and design problems of ADS-B have never been addressed and fixed. Also, given the efforts in terms of time and money invested so far and still to be invested, it is unclear why such mission critical and safety related protocols are not addressed at all, and there is no security chapter in the main requirements specification document. In response to AIN's question about ADS-B security for the September article, the FAA explained that it has ways to filter out spoofed ADS-B targets, although any details about such methods are secret. ITT Exelis, which is building the U.S. ground station ADS-B network, told AIN the U.S. national ADS-B system has received the FAA Information Security Certification and Accreditation. The accreditation recognizes that the system has substantial information security features built in, including features to protect against the type of spoofing attacks cited in recent media reports. Exelis cannot divulge details on the security features built into the ADS-B system. Kostin, the white paper co-author, is encouraged that concerns about ADS-B security are getting some new attention. He worries, however, that in the context of modern technology, the FAA is naive when it says it knows how to deal with spoofed targets, but that such information is security sensitive. In an email response to AIN, Kostin wrote, "Countless times history has shown that in IT info security, security by obscurity failed epically, starting from small companies and ending with giants and seasoned players, and in the long run it turned bad for them, and worse, it turned bad for their paying and unsuspecting customers, unless the results are made public and the community can assess both the results and the ways the FAA, Eurocontrol, and ATC concerned bodies are securing ADS-B and mitigating the threats and risks against described vulnerabilities, all these done in an open and transparent dialogue framework, there are doubts about full security." Indeed, the FAA's statement that we have ways of validating the data that shows up on a controller's screen is true. There are various procedures and backup plans for the cases of ghost spoofed aircraft, and mostly it is because ATC is still a human-centric technology where a lot of work is done by humans, coordination, voice communication, and so on. However, our point is that the system should be secured from the architecture and design, not as a side effect of the legacy. And that's the end of this article. Basically, the short version is that this new technology that's going to replace the current radar systems with air traffic control in the U.S. A lot of the hacker community is coming out and saying this isn't actually secure, and it's putting people at risk because what Lupinit said is that anyone with any basic knowledge of hacking and with less than $100 can basically find ways to interfere with this system. And let us know in the comments if I got that right, and hopefully you can shed more light on this story, because I haven't heard too much about it. But overall, it seems like another thing where the U.S. is potentially setting people up for not having proper security, and potentially something bad could happen, and then later, if something bad does happen, they'll say, "Oh, we couldn't possibly have done anything about it," just like they did with 9/11, and feigned innocence and ignorance, and when they really could have taken more steps to secure the system. And I'll check out the comments here. Let's see. Oh crap. All right. comments. Daniel says, FYI, the ADSB system has had no security applied since 2012 at least. Daniel says, and DEF CON did talks then on how unsecured it is. Imagine one plane suddenly becoming 50 planes on screen. Cannot comment equals does not protect fully against exploit. Yeah, it seems like it. And they'd like us to believe that we have it all under control, but we can't tell you, and that's never a good way to go about things. Gregory Patrick says, "Yo, I'm writing up my cannabis article and having some fun today. How y'all doing?" I'm doing pretty well. Good to see you, Gregory. Always good to have you here. And let's see, Daniel says, "Hi, Greg." Yep. All right, the next article I have here today is from Reason. Actually, I have a couple from Reason. The first one from Reason.com said she received death threats. The police think she sent them. Students regrets, will continue to believe survivors. And this is by Robbie Suave. Police have arrested an Ohio University student and charged her with 3 counts of making false reports. The student, Anna Ayers, claimed to have received death threats and other harassing messages referencing her LGBTQ status, but the authorities now believe she sent those messages herself. Ayers entered a not guilty plea last Wednesday, according to the Post. She faces 6 months in jail and a $1,000 fine if convicted. Ayers was a member of the Student Senate, but she has since resigned from that position. Her claim was initially presumed to be true, and the Student Senate canceled a meeting with the mayor of Athens, Ohio, in order to give Ayers a chance to address the community. Her remarks included a condemnation of the Student Senate itself, the Post reports. Senate will never be the same for me, Ayers said. The friendships will continue to grow, and our successes will always evoke pride, but the memory of my time in Senate and at OU will be marred by this experience. We will all have a memory of a time when this body failed one of its own. Ayers also addressed the writer of the note directly, saying she hoped that person was in the room. She called that person weak, cowardly, and worthless. You may find me revolting and worthy of a threat on my life, but in reality, it is your beliefs that are repulsive, Ayers said. You need to get this through your head, you effing a-hole. I am proud to be who I am, and nothing you could say or do will ever change that. Despite the revelation that the authorities now believe Ayers sent the threats to herself, Student Senate President Maddie Sloat said the Student Senate will not change its commitment to believing survivors. It's important for you to know that I do not for one second regret any of the actions we took in the past week to support Anna on the information that we had at the time, said Sloat. According to the Post, know that if you report something, we will listen. We will believe you. We care about you. Listening is one thing, believing is quite another, especially when it comes to dubious campus bias incidents. And that's the end of that article. So apparently, someone in the Student Senate claimed she had received a death threat, and now at least the police believe that she sent it to herself, and now she is charged with making false reports. And this isn't the first story I've heard about some of these campus types, uh, claiming to have gotten death threats or having had vandalism occur that uses slurs or whatnot, and then it ends up actually being a hoax. I don't really know. I mean, in this climate with some of these SJW types, you don't really know what's going on in their minds, and unfortunately, it looks like they're not above just totally making shit up to try to gain sympathy. Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know what to say about that because I can't imagine being that just bizarre that you need to make up threats to yourself. But we've seen it, many times, and we probably will continue to, because the culture being cultivated of just believing people with no evidence, is a good place for people who are desperate for attention to receive it. It would seem, if you can just make an accusation and then expect the whole campus to coalesce around you and support you regardless of whether there's evidence or not, that's probably attractive to a lot of these people who seem desperate for attention and approval. But at least seems there will be this time. She actually is being charged. There was just a story last week we covered about high school girls making completely false allegations against one of their classmates, and so far they have not been charged with anything. And with that, I'll move to the next Reason article. And this one's by Ronald Bailey. Do I owe it to my criminal relatives to keep my genes a secret when genetic testing results become a tool for law enforcement? The police in Sacramento, California famously used genetic matching data from the direct to consumer genealogy website GEDmatch to identify former police officer Joseph James DeAngelo, age 72, as the Golden State Killer who committed a series of rapes and murders in California in the 1970s and 80s. Genetic information provided to the website by some distant relatives led the police to suspect DeAngelo. The police department directly connected DeAngelo to the murders and rapes by matching old crime scene DNA to his DNA obtained from a car door handle and a piece of discarded tissue paper. Similar genetic genealogy matching has been used to identify criminal perpetrators in about 13 cold cases in the U.S. Police investigators can be expected to resort to such long-range familial searches as more and more genetic information is voluntarily supplied by Americans to such open websites as GEDmatch. Is this a problem? Does this violate the privacy of Americans? An article on identity interference An article on identity inference of genomic data using long-range familial searches recently published in Science by a team of researchers led by Columbia University bioinformatics researchers Yaniv Erlich reports that very soon it will be likely that, at least for Americans of European ancestry, genetic genealogy matching combined with easily obtainable demographic information will be able to identify almost anyone. Genetic matching of even distant relatives enables investigators to refine family trees to eventually identify specific individuals. Such genetic matching is becoming much easier as genetic databases grow. The researchers predict that with a database size of around 3 million U.S. individuals of European descent, 2% of the adults of this population, over 99% of the people of this ethnicity would have at least a single third cousin match, and over 65% are expected to have at least one second cousin match. With the exponential growth of consumer genomics, we posit that such database scale is foreseeable for some third-party websites in the near future. As it happens, 23andMe tells me that I have 1,082 genetic relatives ranging from first to sixth cousins identified in their database. Most legal analysts agree that police use of long-range familial searches using data from non-forensic genetic databases does not violate either constitutional protections or current laws. Nevertheless, some object to police suspicionless genetic surveillance. One proposal by University of Baltimore law professor Natalie Ram and her colleagues is the adoption of a Stored Genetics Act similar to the Stored Communications Act, under which a court may order disclosure of electronic records if the government, quote, offers specific and articulable facts showing that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the records sought are relevant and material to an ongoing criminal investigation. Ram and her colleagues observe that such an act would likely render law enforcement searches of non forensic genetic databases unlawful for crime detection purposes, as there can be no specific and articulable connection between particular database records and a particular crime when investigators seek to use such a search to generate leads, not investigate them. Thus, although such an approach would preserve freedom from perpetual genetic surveillance by government, it may well result in fewer solved cases. Setting aside concerns of how the police might use DTC genetic information, three University of Washington computer scientists outline in an article posted at ARXIV various ways that criminals could misuse unprotected DTC genetic information. Specifically, they suggest that forged genetic profiles can be used by criminals to misdirect investigations, by con artists to defraud victims, or by political operatives to blackmail opponents. For example, a criminal could manipulate genetic data to create a profile for a synthetic second cousin in a database that would point the police using long range familial searches away from the actual perpetrator. Both Ehrlich and the University of Washington researchers suggest that one good way to forestall the manipulation of digitized genetic data for nefarious purposes is for the raw data files generated by DTC genetic testing companies to be digitally signed using a cryptographic key controlled by the DTC company. Profiles submitted without a valid DTC digital signature, such as those of participants in genetic disease research programs, would be rejected from third-party databases like GEDmatch. A digital signature system would also complicate police use of long-range familial genetic searches, since they would have to submit crime scene samples to DTC companies in order to obtain digital signatures so that the profiles could be compared with profiles already in third-party databases. Let's see. Despite his concerns, how worried is Ehrlich about his own genetic privacy? Not very. He, like me, has posted his genomic information online. If you ask me, do you want to share with me your genealogy or your cell phone records or search engine records? I will share my genealogy, he explained in an interview at The Atlantic earlier this year. If you ask me, do you want your search engine data or data your ISP sees or your bank account versus your genome is actually quite. I don't think it's very interesting, but as Ehrlich demonstrates, the rapid expansion of DTC genetic testing databases will make it increasingly hard for any of your criminal relatives to hide from the police. In any case, it's a good idea for genetic testing companies to adopt digital signatures as a way to allay concerns over identifying research participants and forestalling the misuse of genetic data by criminals and the police. That's the end of this article. So basically, there's been a lot of talk about these companies like 23andMe where people send in DNA samples and get back a list of, what different ethnicities or whatnot that they might have in their DNA. And we've already heard of cases where this information has been requested by law enforcement and used against them, and as well as being able to know if someone has a distant relative that comes up in a database. So like this article mentions, is it this person they talk to says, I basically he says he doesn't really care because he doesn't have anything to hide. But again, it kind of if more and more people get into this, then yeah, I mean, I guess then from what it says, practically everyone will have some distant relative who does turn their DNA over to one of these companies, and that's just another thing to keep an eye on. On top of all the surveillance we have going on between our phones and laptops and microwaves and whatnot, as well as surveillance cameras outside. It That's kind of how I think of it. If there's a lot of surveillance cameras outside, you may not always be on someone's camera, but you're more likely to. The more cameras that people put up voluntarily, or whether they're speed cameras put there by police, the more they're out there, the more you're going to be unable to escape view anytime you leave your home. There'll always be some camera that could catch you. And in this, to me, this is similar where, the more people who are willingly sending their DNA to these companies, the more likely, everyone is to have some connection. So, just another potentially dystopic thing out there, which, does bother me. I wouldn't necessarily want to put all of my information out there like this guy in the article, but if that's, I guess some people still choose to do it to gain knowledge based on for medical reasons. I mean, I understand that, but I won't be doing it anytime soon. I won't be requesting any information about my ancestors, or even for medical reasons. I'll just have to go about it the old-fashioned way, and not rely on this, because that's just kind of the end of the line there. If you're giving your DNA to these companies, you should assume that the government will have access to it at some point. Unfortunately, I mean, if there was a way to be sure that it was secure, it would maybe be more appealing to me. But as we know, in this day and age, you can't really trust these companies to care about your privacy. And let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. And speaking of comments, I'll go back and check out what you guys have been saying. Gregory says, I love that you read Reason. Sometimes it feels like I'm the only one reading these libertarian side of things. LOL. I know there's a bunch of us, but they all turned more Republican lately for sure. Seems to me the Libertarian Party is going Republican, I mean to say. Danielle says, sometimes it seems to me the other way around, Greg. LOL. Gregory Patrick says, it's why I dig the party. Has the most interesting people in it for sure. Max says, if I have a choice of privacy violations, I'm okay with this privacy violation. How is this logical? One concession leads to the next. Yeah, that's a good point, for sure. I think, yeah, and that's an interesting point Gregory raises. I think, yeah, it seems like there are some factions of libertarians turning more to the Republican side. I think, speaking of Reason.com, there have been people saying that they seem to be doing the opposite, kind of reaching out more to millennials. And as we know, that means pretty much more leftist type views, as opposed to right wing type views. I think some of the articles I see on Reason do seem to really be trying to fit in with the mindset of a lot of millennials with a lot of topics. Um, it's there's sometimes I think some of the articles are good. You definitely don't see that perspective in the mainstream for sure. But overall, Reason is they seem to be really wanting to become mainstream, and so whenever you have people who want to be mainstream, they're always going to really make concessions, whether it's trying to appeal to the left or to the right. And so I just try to be aware of that, and not be led by what their opinions are, but just come to see their viewpoint when they do have an independent viewpoint from the left or right. But yeah, I mean, the idea that this person in the article would be more comfortable showing off his genetic data compared to his search engine results. It's like, yeah, how about neither? That would seem more sensible. But yeah, that kind of seems like the I have nothing to hide excuse. It's like, well, just because you're not a murderer doesn't mean that you should be totally comfortable with government having your DNA at their disposal. I mean, that could lead to all kinds of horrible things. And Gregory says, I'm old, lol, not really, but most guys in my circle are getting really conservative. I forget millennials exist sometimes, I guess. I should work on that more. Well, it's definitely difficult because on the one hand, you have the typical like neocon types who are usually older, even among Republicans. I don't hear of as many younger Republicans being really conservative, or even being as pro-war as some of the older um, conservatives, or like the Reagan Republicans. But millennials, according to some of these recent studies, millennials are apparently have a soft spot for socialism and communism. And I actually saw something on Twitter the other day that said 60% of millennials said they would prefer living under a communist regime than under capitalism. So it's definitely a scary time. It's kind of like that the song "Stuck in the Middle with You," Joker's. Okay, I'm butchering the song. Sorry. One of you guys knows the song. Just type it in the comments. I don't want to butcher the song there. By was it Steve Miller Band, "Stuck in the Middle with You," and I can't think of the lyrics. It's too early for me. But anyway, let's see. This next article is from antiwar.com. Trump announces U.S. will withdraw from Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. In comments Saturday, President Trump announced that he has decided to withdraw the U.S. from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces, or INF, Treaty of 1987. The treaty limited both the U.S. and Russia from having certain types of nuclear weapons. U.S. officials have been accusing Russia of violating the INF for years, though they have never proven it, and Russia has insisted the missiles in question were not strictly included by the ban. John Bolton has been pushing Trump on a withdrawal, while the State Department and Pentagon both opposed such a move. Trump reiterated claims of Russian violations and also attacked President Obama for not doing something about it. Trump demanded that now that the US has withdrawn from the treaty, Russia immediately vow unilateral compliance. He also demanded similar compliance out of China, who was never a party to the INF in the first place. The pullout was met by immediate criticism, with Mikhail Gorbachev, one of the original signatories, warning it is a reversal of decades of nuclear disarmament efforts. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas was the first NATO official to criticize the move, saying the U.S. should consider the consequences of the pullout for both Europe and for disarmament in general before acting unilaterally. Russian officials faulted the U.S. decision, saying Trump continues to behave clumsily and crudely around international agreements, and that the pullout is a very dangerous step towards an arms race. And that was written by Jason Ditz. Yeah, as others have mentioned over the weekend, what happened to Trump being Putin's personal, troll or whatever? I thought Trump was in bed with Putin, and now he's done something that Russia really does not like. So I don't know exactly what those who are believers in Russiagate have to say. about this whole thing now, that it looks like things are still on this neo Cold War path, unfortunately, with just always things coming from both sides. Basically, going back to, um, yeah, I mean, just there's, I don't really know how else to describe it other than kind of a new Cold War front type thing. Just playing chicken to see who, who will give up first or wave the white flag or whatever. Um, and I learned that Mikhail Gorbachev is still alive, which is surprising. I don't know how old he is. But I did not expect him to still be alive at this point. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, we hear this type of news comes out practically daily of the U.S. doing something, Russia doing something. At the end of the day, it's those of us who just want to live our lives in peace. We're always the losers in the end. We are supposedly have these elected officials, yet why do things like this continue going on? I don't think the average American or the average person in Russia really gives a shit about what the opposite country's government wants, and what nuclear weapons each one accuses the other of having. I mean, it just goes to show you that we're not being represented by anyone because if we were, these things would not be happening. So I as we come closer to the midterm elections, I always wonder that about those who keep claiming that we just have to vote harder. I really don't see the effect. We've been voting all this time, and that's taken us here. So I don't really see how voting will take us out of it at this point. And speaking of this Russia thing again, I was out at the store yesterday and saw the local paper here with the headline saying that another Russian official, quote unquote, has been accused of trying to interfere with the midterm elections this time. And who knows what that means? Interfering with the election. I mean, is Facebook not interfering with the election by taking down political pages? I mean, what's the definition of election interference at this point? It just seems like a made up concept for Russiagators to continue to deny uh, the reality that no one wanted to vote for Hillary Clinton. Sad to say for them. Daniel says, "No, you probably shouldn't, Gregory. It will drive you insane," referring to what getting to know millennials. Yeah, I think a lot of millennials are difficult. Um, I mean, I'm a millennial. I typically don't like a lot of the people my age, but it is what it is. Gregory says Gen X has no place in the society. Kinda got lost. I think I'm Gen Y. Could be considered the oldest millennial ever, but I'm not sure I want that title. LOL. Daniel says clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am. Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's the song I was thinking about, but then failed to come up with the lyrics at the critical moment. My apologies to the Steve Miller Band. And let's see. But in any event, it's probably a good place to wrap up. And I think I got all the comments for now. Oh wait, nope. Danielle says maybe they should try it by forming communes in the desert or something, making sure to build safe spaces there. I bet they would rush back to capitalism at top speed. Good point about interference. Yeah, I mean, as far as millennials go, yeah, I think it really does come down to, being millennials are a generation that, I mean, that's kind of the flip side of the Cold War is that, I don't necessarily appreciate the idea of propaganda and the Red Scare, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that communism is a good thing. You know, you don't have to be hysterical about it like people were back in the 50s and 60s, but that doesn't mean that communism is cuddly and something that younger generations that didn't necessarily live through the heart of the Cold War should be embracing. And it basically seems a lot like just a rebellious type thing. Well, you know, where if but then again, how does that make sense? So they hate Russia. I don't know. Okay, whatever. I'm not gonna try to make sense of millennials' views now, but you know. All right. Well, just another note. We're looking for new hosts for Bad Morning News. If you're interested in that, give us a shout out on Discord or in the comments. All the links from today's articles will be in the description box within a few minutes here. And yeah, with that, I guess we'll wrap up for today. But thank you all for being here. Good to see lots of you in the comments. And take care. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a bad morning, everybody. Remember, screw the state, fuck the system. Have a good day, but a bad morning. See you guys tomorrow.